The metallic hum of the Dominator's docking bay echoed as Captain Marcus Thorn was escorted through its cavernous expanse. Two towering Imperial guards flanked him, their imposing figures clad in dark, reflective armor that exuded authority. Restraints bound Marcus's wrists, but his stride remained steady, almost defiant. His face bore no signs of fear, only a quiet, unnerving focus. Admiral Croven watched from a high observation deck, his hands clasped behind his back. A veteran of countless campaigns, his cold, calculating demeanor was matched only by his unyielding loyalty to the Galactic Empire. He had orchestrated this capture himself, deploying one of the Empire's elite hunter squadrons to ensnare this human operative. To Croven, Marcus was a potential goldmine of intelligence, a means to dismantle Earth's resistance once and for all. The soldier was brought into the heart of the ship, an interrogation chamber designed to crush the spirit of even the most resilient prisoners. Its stark, featureless walls radiated a faint hum of energy, while a single chair sat bolted to the floor, surrounded by an array of menacing instruments. Marcus was seated and secured, his restraints merging seamlessly with the chair. Standing across from him was Commander Jorth, the Empire's chief interrogator. Jorth was a methodical man, known for breaking prisoners with a mix of psychological manipulation and cutting-edge technology. His gaze bore into Marcus like a predator assessing its prey. "You must be Captain Thorn," Jorth began, his voice smooth yet laced with contempt. "The so-called scourge of Sector 9. Tell me, do you think your resistance actually stands a chance against the might of the Empire?" Marcus didn't reply. He sat still, his eyes fixed on Jorth with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. Jorth smirked and stepped closer. "I've broken men stronger than you. Your silence only prolongs the inevitable. Shall we begin?" A mechanical arm descended from the ceiling, tipped with a sleek device designed to probe neural pathways. It hovered inches from Marcus's temple, emitting a low, rhythmic pulse. "This device," Jorth explained, almost as if he were giving a lecture, "will access your memories directly, painlessly, if you cooperate. But if you resist," he allowed the sentence to trail off, a cruel grin forming on his lips. The machine activated, its light flickering as it began its invasive work. Marcus winced slightly but maintained his composure. His thoughts swirled, not with panic but precision. He had been trained for this, conditioned to shield his mind against such probes. Minutes passed, and the machine's output screen remained blank. Jorth's expression shifted from smug confidence to confusion. "Interesting," Marcus finally said, his voice calm and deliberate. "Is that supposed to do something?" Jorth's patience thinned. "You're toying with forces you don't understand, human. We will break you." Marcus leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed, his tone sharpening. "You think I don't understand the Empire? I've been studying you for years. Your overconfidence is your greatest flaw." Jorth hesitated, unnerved by Marcus's unshakable composure. He turned to the guards. "Increase the probe's intensity." The machine's hum grew louder, and a searing jolt coursed through Marcus's mind. His jaw clenched, but he refused to give Jorth the satisfaction of a reaction. The chamber's energy seemed to thicken, a palpable tension growing as Marcus's resistance became an act of defiance against the Empire itself. Admiral Croven entered the room, his boots clicking against the floor. His mere presence commanded attention, and Jorth stiffened. "Report," Croven demanded. "The subject is unusually resilient, Admiral," Jorth admitted reluctantly. Croven approached Marcus, his piercing eyes scrutinizing every detail of the man before him. "Captain Thorn," he began, his voice icy, "you're not here by accident. You're too valuable. Tell me, why did you allow yourself to be captured?" Marcus smirked faintly. "You give yourselves too much credit, Admiral. If I wanted to avoid capture, you'd still be chasing shadows." The room fell silent. Croven's lips tightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his otherwise stoic face. He turned to Jorth. "Leave us." Jorth hesitated but obeyed, retreating with the guards. Now, only Croven and Marcus remained in the chamber. "You're playing a dangerous game, Thorn," Croven said, his voice low. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing, it won't matter. The Empire's reach is absolute. Resistance is futile." Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering Croven's words. "Absolute power," he said, "has a funny way of crumbling under its own weight." Croven leaned closer, his tone menacing. "We'll see how long you hold on to that bravado. You're not as clever as you think." Marcus's eyes glinted. "Maybe, but clever enough to know this. You've already made your first mistake." "What mistake?" Croven demanded. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he reclined in the chair, his expression as unreadable as ever. Croven stared at him, a mix of frustration and unease brewing within. Something about Marcus felt off. This wasn't a man who had been defeated. This was a man who had chosen to walk into the lion's den with purpose. As Croven turned to leave, Marcus's voice stopped him. "You won't win this war, Admiral," Marcus said, his tone calm but carrying a weight that lingered in the air. "And when your empire falls, remember this moment. Remember that it started here." Croven paused, his back to Marcus, before striding out of the chamber without another word. The door sealed shut, and Marcus was left alone in the silence. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The game had begun. This section introduces the central conflict and key characters while maintaining a tight focus on tension and psychological warfare. Marcus's calm resilience contrasts sharply with the Empire's arrogance, setting the stage for what's to come. The Dominator's command deck pulsed with tension. Admiral Croven stood at the center, his gaze fixed on a holographic map of the ship. Crimson alerts flickered across various sectors, each symbolizing a system failure. Officers scrambled at their consoles, their voices overlapping in an unintelligible din of status reports and urgent commands. "Explain this," Croven demanded, his tone sharp as a blade. Lieutenant Varick, the ship's chief systems officer, stepped forward, sweat beading on his brow. "Admiral, the malfunctions appear to be cascading. We've identified power fluctuations in critical systems, but the cause remains unclear." Croven's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me the flagship of the Galactic Empire is falling apart, and no one knows why?" The lieutenant faltered, then shook his head. "No, sir. It's not random. These disruptions are too precise. They're targeting key infrastructure, communications, navigation, even life support in isolated sectors. Someone is orchestrating this." "Sabotage," Croven growled, his jaw tightening. He turned to the security officer at his right. "Double patrols across all decks. I want the saboteur found now." Deep within the ship, Captain Marcus Thorn moved with calculated precision. Every step was deliberate, every action purposeful. He had freed himself from his restraints hours earlier, leveraging the guard's overconfidence and his intimate knowledge of Imperial technology. Now, he moved through maintenance tunnels and hidden service corridors, the ship's labyrinthine design serving as his ally. The Dominator was a masterpiece of engineering, but its complexity was its vulnerability. Marcus stopped at a junction, his eyes scanning a small, portable datapad he had commandeered. It displayed a map of the ship's internal systems, highlighting weaknesses he had already exploited. He tapped a command, and another section of the ship dimmed, its power rerouted to create confusion and delay. He smirked. The Empire's arrogance was its greatest weakness. They had captured him, believing him to be a mere soldier. They hadn't realized they had brought a weapon into their midst. In the engineering bay, Chief Engineer Draxus pored over the latest diagnostics. The room buzzed with frantic activity as his team struggled to contain the escalating failures. "This doesn't make sense," Draxus muttered, wiping his grease-streaked hands on his uniform. "The system redundancies should have prevented this." "Sir," a technician called out, "we've lost another power relay in Sector 7. It's spreading faster than we can counteract." Draxus slammed his fist on the console. "We're being played. This isn't a malfunction. It's warfare." Marcus's handiwork extended beyond simple sabotage. Hidden devices, smuggled aboard in his uniform and equipment, were now wreaking havoc. Each was carefully placed to bypass security protocols and blend into the ship's infrastructure. But Marcus wasn't content to rely on technology alone. He understood that the Empire's greatest strength, their unwavering hierarchy, could also be turned against them. As he crept through the ship, he planted seeds of discord. A power outage here, a security alarm there. Crews in different sectors began to suspect each other. Reports of unexplained movements and unauthorized access spread like wildfire. On the command deck, Croven's frustration boiled over. "Commander Jorith," he barked. Jorith entered briskly, his face set in a scowl. "Admiral, my interrogation of Thorn revealed nothing useful. He's a wall of silence." "Forget the interrogation," Croven snapped. "He's loose aboard this ship, and he's tearing it apart piece by piece. We've underestimated him." Jorith stiffened. "Impossible. He couldn't have escaped without assistance." Croven's glare was withering. "And yet, here we are. Find him, Commander. Deploy every available resource. I want this ship secure within the hour." "Understood." Jorith saluted and departed, but unease gnawed at him. He prided himself on control, yet this lone human had managed to slip through his grasp. Meanwhile, Marcus reached one of his primary targets, the Central Communications Hub. It was heavily guarded, but Marcus had already prepared for this. He activated a diversion, an explosion in a nearby corridor that sent alarms blaring and drew the guards away. With practiced efficiency, Marcus slipped into the hub and began his work. He connected his datapad to the mainframe, uploading a custom-designed virus. The program was simple yet devastating. It would disrupt the Dominator's fleet-wide communication, leaving the Empire's flagship isolated and vulnerable. The virus began its work, and Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He wasn't just sabotaging his ship. He was striking at the heart of the Empire's power. But his success didn't go unnoticed. The ship's AI detected the intrusion and locked down the communications hub. Alarms blared as security forces converged on his location. Marcus didn't panic. He had planned for this, too. As the first wave of guards stormed the room, they found nothing but an empty terminal and the lingering hum of a recently activated escape hatch. Back on the command deck, Croven's fury was palpable. "He's making fools of us," he snarled. Jorith returned, his expression grim. "Admiral, we've traced the sabotage to the communications hub. Thorn was there, but he's already gone." "Damage report," Croven demanded. Varric hesitated. "Sir, the virus he planted is spreading. We've lost control of fleet communications. Backup systems are compromised. It could take days to fully restore." Croven's fist clenched. Days. In that time, the Resistance could strike at their most vulnerable points. "He's not just escaping," Croven said, his voice low. "He's dismantling us from within." In the shadows of the ship's lower decks, Marcus moved toward his next objective. He could feel the Empire's grip slipping, their mighty vessel unraveling one system at a time. For the first time in years, the Galactic Empire was on the defensive, and Marcus Thorn wasn't finished yet. The Dominator groaned under the strain of its own disarray. Emergency lights bathed the hallways in a pulsing red glow, a stark contrast to the ship's usual sterile brilliance. Marcus Thorn moved like a shadow through the chaos, his mind focused and his body propelled by years of rigorous training. Every turn, every step was calculated, his knowledge of the ship's design allowing him to stay one step ahead of the Empire's forces. Admiral Croven stood at the helm of the command deck, a storm of anger brewing behind his sharp eyes. Around him, officers scrambled to make sense of the growing crisis. "Admiral," Lieutenant Varric reported from his station, "we've identified multiple breaches in our internal systems. The saboteur has infiltrated our primary engineering controls." Not a saboteur, Kroven snapped. It's Thorn, and if we don't stop him, this ship will be nothing but a smoldering husk. He turned to Commander Jorth, who had just returned from a fruitless search of the lower decks. Status? Kroven demanded. Jorth shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. He's unpredictable, Admiral. Every move he makes is meant to misdirect us. We're chasing ghosts. Then stop chasing, Kroven said, his tone icy. Force him out. Flood the maintenance decks with gas. Seal off the engineering bay. Herd him into a corner where we can crush him. Yes, sir, Jorth replied, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He had never seen an adversary like Thorn before, a single man dismantling the Empire's flagship from the inside. Far below, Marcus crouched in the shadows of an auxiliary engineering hub, watching as a team of engineers hurriedly worked to restore power to the ship's failing systems. Their voices echoed in the confined space, laced with panic as they struggled to bypass the sabotage he had meticulously set in motion. Marcus activated a small device on his wrist, triggering another wave of disruptions. Across the ship, entire sections lost gravity, sending officers and guards careening into walls and ceilings. Fires broke out in isolated compartments as overloaded circuits sparked violently. The engineers in front of him shouted in alarm as their consoles went dark. Marcus seized the opportunity, slipping past them unnoticed and planting a small explosive charge on the main power conduit. With a swift retreat, he found cover and activated the detonator. A sharp crack echoed through the hub as the explosion knocked out the conduit, plunging another quarter of the ship into darkness. Engineering compromised, a panicked voice announced over the intercom on the command deck. Kroven slammed his fist onto the console in front of him. Enough of this, he roared. Jorth, assemble every available soldier and secure the main reactor. Thorn is heading there. It's the only logical target left. Jorth saluted and left, barking orders into his comm as he rallied the Empire's elite troops. Marcus was already ahead of them. He had anticipated Kroven's move, knowing the Empire would assume his endgame was the destruction of the ship's reactor. In truth, his plan was far more calculated. He moved through the ship's ventilation system, his movements silent and deliberate. Emerging near the ship's command uplink, Marcus bypassed the door security protocols with a device hidden in his sleeve. The uplink chamber was the nerve center of the Dominator, a place where the ship's AI core and fleet communication systems converged. Marcus knew this was the true prize, not the ship's destruction, but its strategic value. He placed a modified data spike into the uplink terminal. A cascade of code filled the screen as the device transmitted a virus directly into the Empire's fleet-wide network. This was the heart of his mission, not just crippling the Dominator, but leaving the Empire's forces blind and disorganized across the sector. The door behind him hissed open. Marcus spun, pistol in hand, to see Commander Jorth enter, flanked by two heavily armed guards. "Drop the weapon, Thorn," Jorth ordered, his voice steady but edged with tension. Marcus didn't lower his aim. "You're too late, Jorth. The damage is done." Jorth's eyes flicked to the terminal, where the virus continued to spread. He gritted his teeth. "Do you think this changes anything? You're one man against an empire." "Empires fall," Marcus replied, his tone cold. "They always do." Jorth signaled the guards to advance. Marcus fired, taking one down with a precise shot before diving for cover. The chamber erupted in gunfire, bolts of plasma scorching the walls. Marcus moved with ruthless efficiency, using the room's layout to his advantage. He disabled the second guard with a well-placed strike before turning his attention to Jorth. The two men circled each other, their movements deliberate. Jorth struck first, lunging with a combat blade, but Marcus parried with a brutal counterattack. The fight was swift and brutal, ending with Jorth on the ground unconscious. Marcus retrieved his datapad, ensuring the virus had completed its task. Alarms blared, signaling the Empire's desperation as the ship's systems continued to fail. On the command deck, Croven watched in grim silence as reports flooded in. Entire fleets were losing contact, their formations breaking apart. The Dominator itself was now nothing more than a crippled leviathan adrift in space. "He's dismantled us," Varric said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. Croven clenched his fists, rage boiling beneath his composed exterior. "We're not finished yet. Thorn may think he's won, but he's just declared war on the entire Empire." In the shadows of the uplink chamber, Marcus activated a final command on his datapad, erasing all traces of his virus and ensuring the Empire would never reverse engineer his work. He slipped into the ventilation system once more, vanishing like a ghost. The Dominator was falling, and with it, the first cracks in the Galactic Empire's reign had begun to spread. The Dominator was a dying beast, its once pristine systems flickering like a dying star. Lights throughout the ship sputtered and hummed as power continued to fail in waves, and its mechanical heart struggled to keep the vast network of command and life support functioning. To the Empire's elite officers, it was a crippling blow. To Marcus Thorn, it was only the beginning. He moved swiftly through the ship's maintenance corridors, his path well planned, his mind focused. He had no illusions about the chaos he had caused. The virus he had inserted into the Dominator's command systems had sent shockwaves through the Empire's fleet communication, leaving the Imperial forces blind and fractured. But this wasn't just about escape. It was about retaliation. Marcus had already anticipated Croven's next move. He had, after all, studied the Empire for years. His escape route was mapped, and secondary measures were in place to ensure that no pursuit would succeed. His heart raced not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. This ship was falling apart, and with it, the very backbone of the Empire's confidence. Back on the command deck, Admiral Croven stood at the center of the storm. Reports of system failures continued to flood in, and officers scurried, their efforts futile against the growing crisis. "We've lost contact with multiple fleets in the sector," Varric reported, his voice shaking. "The command uplink is completely offline, and we're running on emergency power." Croven's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "What of Thorn?" "He's gone, Admiral." Jortha's voice crackled over the comm. "We're still tracing his movements, but we can't pinpoint him. The ship's internal systems are unreliable now." Croven's eyes darkened. "He's escaping, Jorth. And you're going to let him? Find him. Now." "Yes, sir," Jorth replied, though a hint of doubt lingered in his tone. He had never seen the Empire's enemies so prepared, so capable. But Marcus Thorn was already far ahead. He had made his way to the lower docking bay, the hum of distant engines offering a sense of both urgency and calm. The bay was a labyrinth of corridors and maintenance tunnels, designed to shield the Empire's most valuable assets, ships, supplies, and advanced weapons, from prying eyes. To Marcus, it was the perfect place to make his exit. He bypassed several layers of security effortlessly, aided by his knowledge of Imperial tech and his skill at slipping through their most fortified lines. When he reached the docking bay's edge, a familiar, heavily armed shuttle sat waiting, hidden beneath the shadows of the bay's high walls. Marcus stepped into the vessel's airlock, securing the door behind him. He didn't need to rush. There was still time to ensure that the ship's disarray would be their downfall. With deft hands, he activated the shuttle's engines and began to ascend. The ship's atmospheric control systems were in disarray, but the shuttle's engines were reliable, and the Dominator's immediate pursuit was impossible. Meanwhile, on the command deck, Croven could feel the situation slipping from his grasp. His face was drawn tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The reports were coming in too fast now, each one more dire than the last. "Admiral, the shuttle has launched," Varric called out, his voice a mixture of disbelief and dread. "We're detecting a small craft exiting the docking bay. It's Thorn." Croven's eyes flared with fury. "Activate the pursuit drones. Now." A series of commands were issued, and the Dominator's fleet of pursuit drones, small but deadly, equipped with blasters and advanced tracking systems, launched into space. The drones swarmed outward, seeking to track the escaping shuttle. But Marcus Thorn was no fool. He had planned for this moment, knowing full well that the Empire would throw everything at him in their desperation. He quickly activated his shuttle's cloaking system, rendering it invisible to the drones. The pursuit would be difficult, but not impossible. Still, Marcus didn't want to be followed for too long. He punched in coordinates for a nearby asteroid field, a treacherous maze of rocks and debris that would throw off the drones and give him time to plan his next move. The shuttle hurtled toward the field, weaving in and out of the dense clusters of asteroids. The drones followed closely, but their sensors were struggling to keep up, impeded by the constant stream of rocks and debris that clogged their path. Croven's voice crackled over the comm, cold and furious. "You think you've won, Thorn? You've only delayed the inevitable. We will find you, and when we do, we will make you regret ever stepping foot on our ship." Marcus smirked as he adjusted the shuttle's trajectory. "It's already too late, Croven. Your empire is crumbling, piece by piece." With a final calculated maneuver, Marcus sent the shuttle careening into a dense cluster of asteroids, shaking the drone's pursuit off. He knew the Empire wouldn't give up easily, but he had bought himself precious time. Back aboard the Dominator, Croven seethed, watching the fleeing shuttle disappear into the chaos of the asteroid field. "Continue the pursuit," he ordered, his voice strained but resolute. "We won't rest until Thorn is captured or dead." Yet even as Croven issued the command, he could feel a flicker of doubt gnawing at him. Marcus Thorn had struck at the heart of the Empire, and survived. He had turned the tables. In the distance, Marcus Thorn gripped the show's controls with a steady hand, his mind already working on his next move. The Dominator was just the beginning. The Empire would pay for their arrogance, and he would be the one to bring them to their knees. The silence of space was a cold companion to Marcus Thorn as he drifted in his shuttle, a speck in the vastness of the universe. The asteroid field around him was no longer just a hiding place. It was a symbol of his defiance. He had evaded the Empire's grasp once more, but the cost had been high. His mission was far from over. As he steered the shuttle toward a nearby abandoned station, Marcus's mind churned with strategy. His hands were steady, but inside, a quiet storm brewed. The Dominator had been crippled, its communications shattered, and yet he knew better than to think the Empire would give up so easily. Their wrath would be swift, their retaliation brutal. But that was a risk Marcus had calculated. The shuttle docked with the station, its systems humming as the airlock sealed. Marcus quickly disembarked, his boots clanging against the cold metal floor. He was alone now, his only ally the flickering lights of the decrepit station. He'd need to repair his systems and gather resources for the next phase of his plan. There would be no time for rest. Croven was still on the Dominator, but his ship was unraveling. The more Marcus had sabotaged, the more fractured the Empire's grasp on its own might had become. Yet it was only a matter of time before they regrouped, before they found him. Back aboard the Dominator, Admiral Croven paced relentlessly across the command deck. The pursuit of Thorn had turned into a futile game of cat and mouse, one that drained him more with each passing moment. His face was a mask of raw frustration, the weight of his failure pressing down on his shoulders. His once unquestioned confidence in the might of the Empire was now a fragile thing, shattered by a single human soldier. "We've lost him," Admiral Varick said, the exhaustion clear in his voice. "Our drones are gone, and we've traced no sign of Thorn's shuttle. He's vanished." Croven's eyes narrowed. "He won't vanish for long." He slammed his fist against the console. "We'll find him, and when we do, he will pay for everything." Despite his words, there was a growing sense of unease in Croven's chest. He had underestimated the human, and that mistake had cost the Empire dearly. It was no longer about catching Thorn. It was about recovering the Empire's honor. Far from the chaos of the Dominator, Marcus worked methodically, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. He had a single goal: to strike at the Empire's heart, to cripple it beyond repair. The station's old systems were unstable, but they would suffice. Marcus knew that to truly bring down the Empire, he needed more than just sabotage. He needed leverage. And in that moment, as he examined the station's antiquated databanks, he found it. A cache of classified Imperial data. Secrets that could turn the tide of the war. He accessed the files, his fingers moving quickly across the console. As the data streamed across the screen, Marcus felt the weight of the decision settle upon him. He could use this information to bargain, to force the Empire into retreat, or he could destroy it, ensuring that the Empire would never use its secrets against the galaxy again. The decision was clear. Marcus initiated the Purge Protocol, deleting the data with a single command. The Empire would have nothing left to rebuild from. With his task complete, Marcus stood up from the console and turned toward the airlock. The station was no longer a safe haven. The Empire's search would soon extend here, too. He needed to keep moving. But as he moved toward the shuttle, a sudden vibration shook the station. The walls groaned under the strain, and a red light flashed across the room. His heart skipped a beat. The Empire had found him. Back on the Dominator, Krovan stood in the midst of a new crisis. His ship's systems had been damaged beyond repair, and he had ordered a full evacuation. The pursuit of Thorn was no longer a matter of vengeance. It was about survival. "We're leaving the system, Admiral," Varric said, his voice tinged with desperation. "We've sustained too much damage. We can't stay here any longer." Krovan's eyes were fierce. "Not yet. We will make one final strike. Prepare the remaining fighters. I will not leave until I've destroyed him." But as the Dominator slowly limped away, its engine sputtering, Marcus was already one step ahead. He launched his shuttle, activating its cloaking systems once more. The Empire's retreat gave him the perfect opportunity to escape, an opportunity he wouldn't squander. He set course for the heart of the galactic resistance, knowing that he now had the leverage to rally others to his cause. The Empire had been wounded, but it was far from defeated. And he, Marcus Thorn, would be the one to make sure they never regained their strength. The stars outside his shuttle's viewport were distant and cold, but Marcus felt the warmth of something greater than survival. It was a sense of purpose, a spark that could ignite the fires of rebellion. He had struck at the Empire's core, and though the cost had been high, the victory was his to claim. The battle for the galaxy was far from over. But now, Marcus Thorn was no longer just a soldier. He was the spark that would ignite the flames of revolution. And the Empire would never be the same again.